is going on, guys and girls? I hope you're all well. Eddie, Dean, Bert, Steve, todo bien. I'm just reading this article. Listen, this is all on the back of a brilliant podcast that I've just been listening to by friend of the channel, Matt Bishop, former head of communications, Aston Martin F1, where he's talking about Michael Schumacher and his upsides as far as his brilliance on the track, his ability to prepare for a Grand Prix in a season, as versus his downsides being his ruthlessness, extremis. It's different. It is different. But as I'm listening to it, I'm parlaying to Max Verstappen, and he's reminding me of him. I've long said that Max reminds me a lot more of Senna than he does Schumacher. But as Matt Bishop and Richard Williams are talking about Schumacher, I'm being reminded more of Max. There are parallels, but I've just seen this article. Let me share this with you very quickly. Adrian Newey set for talks with Red Bull over F1 future after exit reports. It is techie. Oh, I've got a little man on the way. Bear with me 1 second. Into all this stuff, this Matt Bishop, Richard Williams, go and watch it. Colossally, that's history. Obviously a reference to Murray Walker's commentary piece so many years back. But it's techie. We'll get into that shortly, but I've just seen this Guardian article. Adrian Newey set for talks with Red Bull over F1 future after exit reports. Christian Horner's not so slack as far as his people management after all, is he? They realise all that big talk from Christian and Pierre Vacher about the team will survive if Adrian Newey does leave, that he's only been a part-timer over the past couple of years, that he's barely touched a car not named the RB18. Very little involvement with RB19 and 20, and now we get reports from The Guardian say that Adrian Newey is set to begin talks with Red Bull's management to resolve his future with the team after reports this week that he's expressed a desire to leave. The Guardian understands that Red Bull's chief technical officer is yet to formally tender his resignation or announce to staff that he will be leaving, and insiders say the headlines caught Newey and the team by surprise on Thursday. The 65-year-old has made no comment, and Red Bull have stated only that he's under contract with the team until the end of 2025, and they are unaware he's joining another team. Holy smoke. Okay, all right. Thanks for the clarification, Guardian. So that's still very much a situation in flux. The goalposts are moving in real time as we talk. Let me talk about this podcast. Friend of the channel, Matt Bishop, God tier level F1 storytelling each and every single time. I was watching back him recounting the 2008 circumstance, Lewis's first championship, and the humility with which Felipe Massa even comported himself after first crossing the line and thinking that he'd won, and then realising that it was Glock, wasn't it? That Lewis Hamilton had overtaken Glock and was going to be champion that year. Chaos scenes, heartbreak. Felipe Massa was broken. I don't think Felipe was ever the same after that event. And again, we could talk about the accident as well. That bolt hit his helmet, a similar sort of thing. But for the Brazilian to behave that way on the back of not necessarily tragedy, but heartbreak in extremis, was absolutely admirable. And the way Matt Bishop gives words, retells that story of that Grand Prix where he was there in person is incredible. And I only say that to say this. If there's one podcast that you listen to not named Cameron F1, definitely go and check out this one. He's talking with Richard Williams about Schumacher and his ruthlessness. Firstly, he gives Schumacher a lot of praise. Schumacher, Michael, absolutely revelant. Again, one of the winningest drivers ever, first and foremost. 7-time joint record holder with Sir Lewis, Carl Davidson, Hamilton. Put that on the table for in the first instance. As far as his preparation and his willingness, his commitment to be more ready for each and every single Grand Prix than his competitors. Different gravy. Absolutely different gravy. Hired himself a personal trainer. Again, that was unheard of, right? F1 up until that point was James Hunt drinking in the week before the race. It was very rock and roll, right? Not so with Michael. He changed all of that, paying attention to his wellness, his mental health, being anal even about his sleep. Do you know what I mean? He took it to a completely different level, and the rest at the time were caught napping. They weren't ready for that sort of stuff. And then if you talk about his driving, his ability to pull time out of his AWS, like just impromptu, on tap, Matt Bishop and Richard speak to this succinctly, brilliantly. They provide loads of colour to this and give examples. When Ross Brawn in Buenos Aires asked of Michael, listen, we need 12 seconds over the next 6 laps. And Michael was like, copy. And we'll just go out and smash it out as if it was nothing. His ability to tap into God tier lap time, impromptu, almost on call, was a completely different level to anything we've seen since or before. But then, here's where the podcast gets really techie. Hence the bloody thumbnail with me talking about Max Verstappen's ruthlessness. Sometimes with the God tier ones, you guys will understand the brilliance and the downside that sometimes manifests itself in ruthlessness. They are the same coin, right? Different sides. And they talk brilliantly to Michael's downsides as far as ruthlessness, sometimes in clutch periods. 1994 is your first example. Damon Hill and Michael have competed neck and neck, tooth and nail for the entire season. Get down to Adelaide and Michael makes a mistake. Damon comes up the inside of Michael Schumacher, up that right-hander, and Michael cuts him off. He closes the door right. That's ruthlessness. I'm not going to say the C word, but that is absolutely ruthlessness. And where does this come about? And again, Matt Bishop talks that is better than I ever could. The genesis story of this type of ruthlessness. Because remember, F1, as far as overtaking and defending, F1 has always been like a gentleman's game. There's an agreement there, right? Because to overtake somebody, you've got to have a willing dance partner. If you've ever been to a karting track and like raced with noobs, people who've never karted before, they don't understand this, right? This back and forth when you're overtaking and defending. It's got to be done with an element of fairness. This gentleman's agreement, right? If it's not there, then it just becomes banger racing, as Matt and Richard allude to on this podcast. And that's not what F1 is. It's the upper echelon of motorsports, and it is a form of, you need a dance partner, right? A willing dance partner. And the critique levelled at Michael is that sometimes he would forget this, right? In 1997 too, against Jacques Villeneuve, again, title decider, final race, Jerez. And Michael sees, he's got issues with the car. Michael sees Jacques going up his inside, and he tries to do exactly what he did in 1994, which ultimately led to him winning the championship. Tries to close the door on Jacques Villeneuve last minute. But you've hit the wrong part, Michael. That hasn't worked, my friend, to quote Martin Brundle's now infamous commentary. Didn't work. Ross Brawn has been quoted as saying, listen, Michael, after the race when we debrief, Michael, look what happened. Schumacher didn't even realise he'd done something wrong. So caught up was he in that moment of ruthlessness. And it's testament to the man that he was so focused, right? There's upside. You can couch it in different terms. Both upside and downside. Hold on. Both. And being a part-time father. Right, I'm going to have to go in a minute. Okay. Ruthlessness, Michael Schumacher. Should we talk about Hungary as well? Rubens, do you remember the one where he encroached when he parked him up against the bloody wall? Looked like Rubens Barrichello was going to have one of the biggest incidents in all of F1 history. And that Rubens Barrichello, the Brazilian, by the way, was supposed to be a friend, an ex-teammate of Michael Schumacher. That's the level of ruthlessness that we are talking about, ladies and gents, when we're talking about Michael Schumacher. His brilliance and his ruthlessness even, but two sides of the same bloody coin. You can't have one without the other almost. And then again, probably the most recent instance of Michael Schumacher's ruthlessness. Rascasse 2006 qualifying session, competing with Fernando Alonso, the new one on the scene, having just lost in 2005 to the Spaniard, the man from Oviedo, Asturias. 2006 comes around and Michael's not keen to repeat that mistake. This is for the 8th, remember? And again, parallels to the dilemma facing Lewis Hamilton in 2021. This is for the 8th as far as Michael Schumacher's concerned, and he doesn't want to relinquish that. Monaco, lest we forget, qualify on pole in Monaco, and then you're all but guaranteed the win on a Sunday, lest you experience reliability issues. So Michael was on provisional pole, going for another hot lap, knowing that Fernando Alonso from Oviedo, Asturias was charging behind him on a hot lap, set to go purple, set to steal provisional pole from the Regenmeister. What did Michael do now? On Rascasse, just parked it up. Just parked it up. Shades of Nico Rosberg a couple of years later, right? Just parked it up, knowing that would bring out the yellow flags and that would end the session, and Alonso couldn't complete his lap where he was set to seize pole position and probably the race victory for Michael Schumacher. Now, Matt Bishop talks to this so brilliant. This is why you have to go and listen to the podcast, because Matt Bishop talks to this better than I ever could. The problem for Michael is that was a different era in 06, right? No longer did you have the press and PR guy next to you, or girl next to you, to say, okay, that's enough for the questions. So Michael Schumacher had to field questions about that incident, him purposefully parking up at Rascasse to disrupt an oncoming, a charging Fernando El Pan Alonso from Oviedo, Asturias, from stealing the pole position and sowed the race victory. The onslaught of questions. We know what you did, Michael. Explain this in the FIA press conference. And Matt Bishop described, you can almost see Michael disappointed as he realises that the gig's up. People realise what he has done, that this is the most ruthless of all the incidents, right? Keke Rosberg, Matt Bishop says, characterised the incident as a cheap cheat. Michael being one who cared for his PR and his public demeanour, how the greats, particularly Keke Rosberg, 1982 champion, how those guys recognised him. Jackie Stewart similarly came out and said something similar. Not good enough. Michael Schumacher is too good, too brilliant a driver to do something so cheap as to deliberately park up at Rascasse to disrupt a charging Fernando Alonso. You just don't do that. That's far too ruthless. And again, I love the way that Matt Bishop and Richard Williams characterise it, ruthlessness. Parlay that now to 2021. Max Verstappen, like Michael Schumacher, and this is where you draw dotted lines between the two and their genesis story and who they are, right? Their respective ruthlessness, because they are both god tier drivers. I'm not saying this in any way to disparage either Michael or Max. That's fool's gold. That would be daft as far as their accolades and the uppermost ceiling of their capability as peddlers on the track. I couldn't do that. That would be daft. I would lose all credibility. Both of them are god tier drivers. Both of them will be on the Mount Rushmore of F1 drivers when all is said and done. However, if we're talking about ruthlessness, how can we not have this conversation? And again, my guy Matt Bishop on Colossally, That's History podcast, on all sick podcasting platforms, talks about the evolution of what it is to be an F1 driver. Because remember, Michael Schumacher's story came from humble beginnings, right? Go-karting settings. And again, that hasn't always been the case as far as the journey, the route most travelled of F1 drivers to get to the Formula. But karting is very different, chat. Very different, Stephen A. As far as what you learn, like how you learn to race. Karts are durable, right? And you can bang wheels in karts. You don't need to be a gentleman necessarily. In fact, you could make the argument that the most aggressive of the talented drivers in karting oftentimes is the one that gets their hand raised, that ends up on the top step of the podium. So that was Michael's route into F1. Karting. His dad built himself a karting track in his bloody back garden, for crying out loud. So Michael came up as a go-karter, hence why the willingness to be aggressive and dive bomb and hang somebody out to dry was something different in Michael from what we'd seen previously. Senna probably the only other one. That willingness to leverage aggression and ruthlessness against his peers and competitors without compunction. Something different to anything we've ever seen, until fast forward to 2016, 2015 and one Max Verstappen. Because he does similar to Schumacher and Senna. He is cut from their cloth in his ability to leverage ruthlessness. He will go where the others won't go and do what the others aren't prepared to do. Esteban Ocon in Brazil, you saw how he reacted to that, right? And again, this is like the PR friendly F1. He doesn't care. Max Verstappen went straight up to Esteban Ocon and confronted him as if he was Michael Schumacher confronting David Coulthard all those years back. Indeed, a blast to the past. He does not care a fudge. And I think that's worthy of mention, if not praise, because it's different in 2024. The rest of them aren't like that. They are crafted with PR and sponsorship and commercial value in mind. Look at some of Max's incidents. Fast forward now to 2021. Let's talk about Jeddah and the brake test in inverted commas. Now, we can argue back and forth whether that was a genuine brake test or whether Max wanted to give Lewis the position so that he can leverage DRS onto the following straight. We can argue that. No one will ever know for sure. But as far as ruthlessness, if that's not case in point, if that doesn't tell you who Max Verstappen is and that he is cut from the same cloth as Senna and Schumacher who came before him, then I don't know what does. Fast forward to Brazil 2021, turn 4, lap 48, I want to say. The way he hung Lewis Hamilton out to dry. Now, I'm not going to argue legal or illegal. Don't hate the player, hate the game. And again, if the FIA are going to allow you to get away with it, then of course you're going to pull that card each and every single time. It would be foolish not to in a game where tenths and fine margins will ultimately decide the championship and millions of dollars. You can't hate Max Verstappen for leaning up against the FIA and forcing them to make a decision now. However, if we're talking in terms of ruthlessness and in the spirit of F1, and again, remember what I said before about dance partners, the give and take between them, how that's important, a base level. Max Verstappen is absolutely 100% ruthless. And now you can argue this. You can argue that part of his greatness is his ruthlessness even. Now, basketball coaches will always say, for those of you who are familiar with the sport, that you want to use the sideline as a defender, right? Use the sideline, the parameters within which you play basketball as an additional defender, as a sixth man per se. And I think you can argue the likes of Senna, Schumacher after him, and Max Verstappen do this with their ruthlessness. They take it places where the others aren't prepared to go. And it is what it is. You might not like it, but you've got to acknowledge it, Roman Reigns. Surely, Steve A, you have to acknowledge it, right? This is a source of durable competitive advantage in 2024. Like or loathe it. You don't have to cast an opinion, but as versus the other 19 on the grid currently, Lando Norris is a brilliant example. He's just not prepared to go wheel to wheel in the same way, with the same aggression or ruthlessness that Max Verstappen is. The dive bombing, etc. Steve A, you're so jealous. How did he rate Max before the Red Bull was dominant? One sign of an absolute great is how they outperform the car. Which of the current drivers can do that? Stephen A says. Oh, so I'll always cite we did a podcast in 2016 after Brazil. And Steve A, WWE settings, Priscilla, Eddie, How did he stay up? Eddie just watching wrestling. The thing listen, my F1 memory is not the best yet, but the one that sticks out in my mind, we did a podcast after Brazil 2016, me and a couple mates. I have the video somewhere. And I said something to the effect of 2016 Brazil is Max Verstappen's coming out party. Listen, when it's rain and you have a track like Interlagos, the field is levelled right. The quicker cars are no longer the quickest because they don't work as well. The feel is all important. And whilst Max Verstappen in 2016 had a car that was capable of putting it on podium and picking up points, he by no means did he have the fastest car. He couldn't compete with Rosberg and Lewis in that split turbo Mercedes. But in that race, you could just see the way he was overtaking. There's a move, turn 1, turn 2, turn 3, Brazil. There's a move around the outside of Danny Rick, and he's just like, he's taken the karting line and he's gone round the outside. He's right next to the bloody grass, and he's just gone round the outside of both Danny Rick and Nico Rosberg as if they were competing in another formula. And that was evidence enough for me as far as Max Verstappen's concerned to say that, you know what, this dude has all the ability to end up on the Mount Rushmore of F1 drivers. It's there. You can't just do that right. And even some of his saves, he spins on the straight and the way he saves it and corrects it without touching the barrier, just legendary stuff from Max. He's gifted. Nobody can tell me otherwise. Absolutely ridiculous levels of talent from the chap. But I think it's the ruthlessness. I think the ruthlessness sets him apart, you know. Love it or hate it again. It doesn't matter. It is a difference, a unique selling point that separates him from the other 19 on the grid. Currently, he's prepared to put that car in places where the others aren't. Now, the old school fellas, the diehards amongst us will say that's not in the spirit of the game. But again, sometimes when the FIA are so consistently inconsistent in their stewarding that the rule book is written in such an ambiguous way, particularly around the rules of overtaking. Mention no name, Silverstone 2021. What is an apex? What is racing room? What does all that mean? No terms and definitions are in the rules and regs as at April 2024. So I can't hate Max Verstappen in that he leverages this against other drivers. They aren't prepared to take it where he is. And this is no different to Schumacher and Senna before them. It's techie. I tell you what though, the other 19, a friend said this to me. The driver that beats Max Verstappen probably isn't even in F1 yet. He's going to have to come up differently. He will have to be prepared to go where Max Verstappen is. Otherwise, that's a durable competitive advantage that the others are doomed ad infinitum, in perpetuity, to have leveraged against them. But I digress. Little grey squirrel. I love ruthlessness. I think that makes a great driver. I know many disagree. I just like it. You know what, little grey squirrel? I hear you, you know. I don't want to like it. I shouldn't like it. People say it's dirty driving. But again, if the rules and those who are instituting them permit for it, then fair game, eh? Fair game or not. But guys, I digress. Prosecution rest. No further questions, Your Honour.